It's been a long, long week for most of us. We're in the final weeks of a terrible election season. I believe this particular presidential election is making many of us physically ill, sick with worry and stress. I know that we all need a word of love, joy, and forgiveness, and ironically, I think that just such a word of grace comes from this terrible abandonment prayer of Jesus. We're spending our Sunday mornings this fall looking at Jesus' dozen prayers in the New Testament to see what we might learn from the way that he prayed. He wasn't talking to himself after all. And it's a crying shame that this particular prayer is only preached once every 3 years on Good Friday. And this prayer, I have to say, is one of the main reasons that I love and follow Jesus. His being, his heart, his humanity, so exposed while he's being tortured to death. Whatever we can experience in life, Jesus has been there before. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's a cry, a terrible cry. Perhaps a cry we all make, if only to ourselves. It's a cry of meaninglessness when we wonder if anything makes sense, wonder if God is really there, wonder if there's any reason to keep on living by the values of a God that we cannot see, a God who seems terrifyingly powerless or bewilderingly absent when the worst happens. REM got it right. Everyone hurts sometimes. Anne Lamott says that sometimes our minds are like a bad neighborhood we don't want to enter alone. But here is the gospel. There is no part of our mind that we have to enter alone. Jesus has been there before. Jesus of Nazareth, who lived in the most extraordinarily sense of God-belovedness, also experienced the darkest of nights, the night of God-forsakenness. Peter Kraft wrote of Jesus, he came, he entered time and space and suffering. He came to us like a lover. He sits beside us in the lowest places of our lives like water. Are we broken? He is broken with us. Are we rejected? He was despised and rejected of men. Do we weep? He was a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Does he descend into all our hells? Yes. In the unforgettable line of Corrie ten Boom, from the depths of the Nazi death camp, no matter how deep our darkness, he is deeper still. This cry marks the darkest pitch of darkness. It's at this moment, I think, that he did not know, could not know, what would happen with his death. Whether there would be any vindication of his life or his cause, the kingdom of God. Whether his death would be a part of God's redemption of the world, or his death just become one more nameless body thrown away to rot. Whether beyond his last breath he would land in the arms of God. Whether there was anything at all to this spiritual hope called resurrection. He did not know. He could not have known. If Jesus fully entered into our humanity, he fully entered into our ignorance. His cry was a real cry. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? The book of Hebrews contains in its earliest manuscripts a phrase that was later changed because it made the church too uncomfortable. Hebrews 2:9 says, Chloris theou, far from God that he might test death for everyone. The chloris, far, was changed to charis. Just one letter, an omega changed to an alpha. It now reads in most translations, by the grace of God that he might taste death for everyone. We could not bear the thought of Jesus being far from God. So we changed the word. But at that moment on the cross, Jesus, who had been so close to God, experienced being far from God and cried, my God, why have you forsaken me? Richard Foster, the Quaker mystic, has a great chapter on this verse in which he says, when I speak of the absence of God, I'm talking about not a true absence, but rather a sense of absence. I believe God is always with us, but there are times when we have no consciousness of the divine presence. I hold this to be true too, but I don't want to wash out the horror of Jesus' cry. After all, I don't think he knew that he would be resurrected. He did not know. He could not know. There is a Jewish commentary on Deuteronomy 3 when Moses cried out to God to let him enter the promised land. It says that prayer has 10 names, and the first name is cry. So what do we do with this cry? Is not one of our most primal fears the fear of forsakenness, forsaken by others, by God? It's woven throughout our scriptures. A search on the word forsaken in our Bible turns up this. 16 times God's people have forsaken God. 14 times God saying, if you forsake me, I will forsake you. 13 times, if you forsake God, God will bring judgment. 12 times, the promise of God, I will never leave you or forsake you. 6 times, the plea, God, do not forsake me, do not hide your face from me. 3 times, the vow, Lord, we will not forsake you. 2 times, the Lord has forsaken us. 1 time from Psalm 22:1, my God, why have you forsaken me? And 1 time from Jesus' lips, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? How deep our fear is of forsakenness. The most unhappy and tortured people I know are people who believe that God has forsaken and abandoned them. We're dealing with the most profound of pain, psychologically and spiritually. On the cross, Jesus entered into the experience of God forsakenness so that even there we would not be alone. He descended even into the hell of meaninglessness to be with us there and lead us from that dark prison into light. Martin Luther looked at this cry from the cross and sat confused and said, God, forsaken by God? He wrote, who can comprehend it? In Bach's masterpiece, the St. Matthew's Passion, whenever the baritone soloist sings Jesus' words, there's a soft halo of strings surrounding his words, a musical halo depicting his divinity. All except when Jesus utters, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. There the violins, the viola, the cellos are all removed, because here is Jesus completely human, stripped of all divinity. All life long, he lived in the immediacy of God's presence. Abba, he called God, with trust, intimacy, and the confidence of a child to a perfectly loving parent. Now he's willing to suffer God forsakenness for us, not knowing whether this night would ever turn to day. There are those who try to soften the agony of the cry by saying he's quoting Psalm 22. And Psalm 22 ends with an exclamation of trust. By quoting verse 1, they say he was referring to all the verses of the psalm. Well, that may well have been the faith of Jesus at that moment, but it was faith and not knowledge. At that moment, he did not know, could not have known. Tillich seeks to underline the unbroken trust of Jesus at that moment by saying that Jesus still cried, my God, my God. But at that moment, Jesus did not know, could not have known. He walked by faith, not by sight, as we all must. By faith, without the props of feeling or the proof of spiritual experience. Psalm 22, the psalmist cries, I am a worm and not human. There are moments in life that we can feel we've been reduced to something less than human. I remember a man in Louisville about 10 years older than I named David. He was a decorated Vietnam veteran, a helicopter pilot. He had suffered, as the other soldiers of that war, not only the terrors and the traumas of war, but the trauma of coming home from a war to a nation who would not welcome him home because it was so divided about the war itself. 10 years after the end of the war in 1973, this was 1983, Crescent Hill Baptist Church held a Sunday morning service for Vietnam veterans. We were seeking to provide a spiritual homecoming for soldiers and some kind of healing for all of us deeply hurt by that war. That church, my church when I was in seminary and where I was on staff, had been a leader in peace and justice work in Louisville. They had sponsored peace conferences and had invited a controversial Jesuit priest to speak. But Crescent Hill was a community of reconciliation too, and they wanted to honor the soldiers who had done their duty to their nation and incurred great suffering in the process. The day before the worship service, church members had gone to the Veterans Day festivities downtown to give out flyers inviting everyone to the worship service and Sunday dinner. There we saw the most amazing collection of humanity. Men on Harleys, men in wheelchairs, men maimed in body and soul, some with long hair and ink, others crew-cutted in uniform, all bearing the scars of one kind or another from that war. Our pastor asked David to take part in the service and, if he wished, to wear his uniform. He came in uniform, bearing his medals, the first time that they had been out of the box in over 10 years, he said. During the service, David opened the pulpit Bible to Psalm 31, and from it he read verse 11. I am the scorn of all my adversaries, a horror to my neighbors, an object of dread to my acquaintances. Those who see me in the street flee from me. I have passed out of mind like one who is dead. I have become a broken vessel. That's how he felt. That's how David had felt for years. After the service and after the church dinner that followed, he said, with tears running down his cheeks, I have been waiting 10 years for this. I learned last year that a few years ago, David died by suicide. Since the Vietnam War ended, more soldiers have died prematurely than died in the war itself, and we're on the same pace for recent vets too. Perhaps he never quite escaped the darkness of Psalm 31. But I hope and pray that somewhere in the darkness he met the one who cried, my God, why have you forsaken me? And that Jesus led him all the way home to God. We have in Jesus one who has come all the way, endured everything to meet us in the darkest possible night and to lead us to day. It might be pitch black. The night may last far longer than you're able to fathom. But there's a hand there in the darkness, the hand of the one who knows the height of God belovedness and the depths of God forsakenness, one who cried, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, and who has descended into hell to take your hand. There are days that we are not so much interested in the question, is there life after death, as the question, is there life after hell? The hell that many are experiencing here. 1 Peter 3:19 says that at his death, Jesus entered into the realm of the dead and preached to the spirits who were in prison, leading them from darkness and death to light and life. Jesus is preaching still through this crime. I don't know a greater darkness than the darkness of forsakenness, of despair, of loss of meaning, of being cut off from others and from God. Jesus has gone even there. Endured even that, so that there he will be with us and take our hand and lead us from that dark prison into freedom and into light.